بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا من سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فإن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله وخير الحدي حدي محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. After praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we enter into today's discussion, or the general theme of today's discussion being a menace to society. And whilst researching for the title or the theme menace to society, not that I promote such views, looking into great detail about what is a menace to society. Menace to society goes back to a famous movie that was released in 1993 by the Hughes brothers, two twin brothers, at the age of 21, released a movie on a $3 million budget, which they called Menace to Society, to star the famous Tupac Shakur, who was removed by one of the directors. And that era, that time of the early 90s and late 90s, began this culture, this hoodlum culture that you find, which obviously has spread to the Muslims at the moment. Obviously Muslims sometimes take time to fall into the hoodlum culture as well. And then you find other such movies like Juice, starring Tupac Shakur himself, Boys in the Hood, and this gangster attitude that you find. Not that I've, alhamdulillah, ever watched any of these movies, but just reading reviews and research gives you enough understanding of what has taken place in their culture, and that same culture and belief which is coming down in the Muslims as well. A culture of drugs, guns, violence, crime and women. And that's a true reality of many of us Muslims at the moment. And who is the menace? Is it our society or is it your society? Is it the non-Muslims or is it the Muslims? More and more travelling through this country you find, whether it be the back streets of Bradford, Birmingham, Manchester or East London or South London, you find many occasions you find that is a great culture amongst the young Muslim youth, both girls and boys, to be involved in this evil culture. A culture of being a menace to society. Whether that menace is towards the non-Muslims or towards the Muslims themselves. So that should be clarified, that we are partly a menace as well in this society, living in this country at the moment. And some people may see, or some non-Muslims, and even Muslims unfortunately, see myself as a menace to society. And that's a true fact, that many people believe more and more that the way that you address certain issues, that you're just coarse, harsh, rude and arrogant. But that possibly may be true, that I may be classified as a menace to society in front of non-Muslims. I can accept that, because obviously their perception of life is slightly different from Muslims. But for Muslims to say that you're a menace to society, the things that you address, you are the real menace. But the things that we address is nothing but the Shari'ah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I don't come as a menace to society, and nor does Shari'ah come as a menace to society. For every disease there is a cure. The Shari'ah only comes, the Islamic law comes for a cure for humanity, whether Muslims or non-Muslims. And that's the only path that we're following as well, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, is to highlight the problems in our society, to rectify our society. So thus there may be at times a slight connotation of harshness and a portrayal of arrogance in one's speech. But that is only swearing by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, only to wake up the Muslim youth, the things that we are going through
and the problems that we're suffering. Because Deenul Islam brings peace, honor, protection and dignity. For any individual who studies the Shari'ah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you find that maqasid Shari'ah, the purpose of the law, as many ulama have highlighted, revolves around 5 basic fundamental points. The Islamic law, it protects your ird, protects your honor, protects your nasab, your genealogy, your lineage, protects one's deen, one's aql, one's mind, and likewise it protects one's nafs, one's soul as well. So whichever way you look at the Shari'ah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whether it makes something halal or makes something haram, it revolves around these 5 basic fundamental points. That is it good for your deen? Is it good for your honor? Is it good for your property? Is it good for your soul? Is it good for your mind? Likewise, if it's something haram, is it something harmful to your mind, your body, your soul? Everything revolves around these 5 basic points. Is what we need to understand. And thus you find that the Shari'ah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has even things that become possibly haram at a later stage, the Shari'ah will clamp down upon them in the beginning. Not at a later stage. Right from the beginning, the Islamic law will begin to challenge the problems or the vices that exist inside society, which is classified as closing the doors of sin. That which leads to sin becomes sinful as well. That's the Islamic law. Whatever leads to vice becomes haram as well. Whether you manage to get to the final destination of the haram, but that journey towards the haram becomes forbidden according to the Shari'ah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So even common acts could become haram. For example, traveling. Traveling is something mandub, recommended. Ma fi haraj, there's no harm in traveling. But if your traveling is to a destination of su', of evilness, of haram, if your traveling is to something to indulge in a haram action, to fornicate, to commit adultery, to buy drugs, to do whatever you want to do, to commit fraud, then that journey, according to Sharia, becomes haram, becomes forbidden. That's you find many more and more the ulama at the moment are talking about leaving Muslim lands and coming to the Western lands only for vice, for temptation, to relieve yourselves in haram activities. That journey now becomes haram, according to Sharia. Likewise, education is something recommended. The Qur'an and Sunnah is replete of ayat talking about seeking a good education. But if you find that that education, or that subject, or that whole framework leads to immorality, lewdness, openness, loses focus, then even those precincts of learning become haram for a Muslim. That environment becomes forbidden. And remember, the Sharia doesn't look at a certain individual and says that you as a personality may be strong in Iman, so you can indulge in that environment. The Sharia looks at the general public, the general masses, that the general masses will indulge in haram. The general masses will commit haram. So the Sharia is not designed for your own personal need. It's designed for the welfare of humanity, and the Muslims in specific and the non-Muslims in general, to protect all of us from entering into any form of vice. So thus you find that ulama have laid down certain principles based upon this muqaddamah, this introduction. They talk about saddu dhara'i, or daf'ul mafsada. They talk about protecting or holding, remaining any form of wasila of entering into haram. Or daf'ul mafsada, preventing any haram to take place. Is a principle of Sharia. That's you find many in the ulama talk about, that to remove vice is more important than encouraging good. Which many people have forgotten. To remove vice is more important, paramount to do, than to encourage good in society. So to clamp out evil is the role of the Sharia. At the same time, you do find encouraging the good, to order the good and forbid the evil. But forbidding the evil is more important if you read through the works of Shaykh Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. And likewise, other ulama have highlighted that point as well. Prevent evil is more powerful than just encouraging good inside society. So thus this deen becomes a deen of prevention. To prevent certain things. To prevent you from falling into something. A deen of prevention. Not at a later stage when people have committed haram acts. or fallen into dangerous atmospheres and dangerous environments, and then begin to seek the cure. The deen begins right from the beginning. It prevents you right from the initial stages to fall into any form of immediate vice. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the creator. He is the one, He is al-Khaliq, and He has created the makhluk. And He knows what is the nature of man, because He subhanahu wa ta'ala created insan. So when people think that maybe God doesn't know what man needs, or the laws at the moment, the Shari'ah, are not compatible to the 21st century. They're barbaric laws. They're Bedouin laws. They're previous laws of the 6th century. You fail to understand the Shari'ah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.